relevance of the transcendentals of the good, the true, and the beautiful. Inspired by then Cardinal Bergoglio's identification of St. John Paul II's Veritatis Splendor as the gospel of grace, and later as Pope Francis reflected in his encyclical Evangelii Gaudium, we intend this conversation to serve as an opportunity to revisit, consider, and renew the Catholic Church's positive offerings to the young people of the world. So just a few logistical notes before we get underway. We're going to begin with a brief reflection by Bishop Godfrey Ona, the Bishop of Nsukka, Nigeria, and delegate to the Synod. Afterwards, we'll have 7 young people who will be representing various global contexts of the Catholic Church. They will offer brief reflections on their stories of faith and participation, of the opportunities for the Church's engagement of young people in the Synod. Then John Allen, founder and president of Crux, and I will help to moderate a discussion with Bishop Barron, who's the founder of Global Media Ministry Word on Fire, and also Bishop Delegate to the Synod. After that, we will moderate a question and answer period where Bishops Ona and Barron will respond to audience questions. In the interest of making the most of our time, we ask that your questions be prepared concisely and that they be questions. Our group of panelists will be available for individual press opportunities after the event in the Sala Vetri, which is right in back of the room, across the hall. And now I'd like to introduce Bishop Ona. Bishop Ona has served as the Bishop of Nsukka, Nigeria since 2013. Before that, he served as the Vice Rector of the Pontifical Urbaniana University here in Rome from 2008 to 2013. He has served as an expert in previous synods, both the Synod of Africa and the Synod on Evangelization. Please join me in welcoming Bishop Ona.
Good evening, everybody. This combination of colors of black and purple and blue already an indication of how lively this synod is. I'm glad to be here again with the Notre Dame Center for Ethics and Culture. The first experience I had with that center in November was very exciting and very fulfilling. And when I got this invitation to be part of this experience this evening, I couldn't say no, despite my having an idea that the day in the Synod could be a very tiring day. Having myself been involved in the Synod as expert, as you were just told, and as a consultant of the Secretariat of the Synod, for 4 previous synods from 2005 until I left to return to Nigeria in 2013. So I have an experience of how tiring. And Bishop Ben has just confirmed that experience, that at this time of the day, one would want to rest, if any other thing, and not just engage in more reflections. But it's always a joy, especially when young people are concerned. And I was telling people, when I was being picked up, I was telling her that I would rather prefer to listen to young people this time, because the emphasis all this time has been on listening and listening and listening to young people. Meanwhile, so far, only old people have been talking about young people. And as one bishop rightly pointed out, sometimes we talk about our own experience of youth, thinking that it corresponds with the present experience of young people, not remembering that our experience 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago is quite different from the experience of young people of today. Now, what do I tell you as introduction? What I tell you as introduction is that even though it's mainly old people talking about youth, it is still positive that they are doing that. And as we heard at the introduction, it's about the Catholic Church presenting to the world and to the youth positive things about the message of the gospel, especially concerning the youth. especially now that not so many positive things are being said about the church and its her relationship with young people. This time around, we are committed to listening in order to be able to say as much as we can positive things and to encourage not just young people, but the entire church and the entire world to look more positively on life, on the church, and our relationship with God. And that is one beautiful thing I find about this synod. And it is interesting to notice the presence of the young people at the synod hall, in the synod hall. And these young people have a way of rating the bishops and their interventions. And we have already noted it after this first day. A bishop who just finishes speaking and says something very good gets an applause. And a bishop who says something that touches young people in a special way, he gets yahoo! So we are already able to rate the bishops who make the point that touch the young people and those who just generally speak. So that presence, I must tell you, is already more moderating than the presence of the Holy Father. Because to know that young people are there and they are listening carefully in whatever language you may be speaking, Italian, English, French, Portuguese, Spanish, German, they are following through direct, immediate, spontaneous translations, and they are really listening attentively. And that is also an indication to the Synod Fathers and to the church hierarchy generally that young people are listening attentively, and apart from listening also, they want to be listened to. And I want to share a positive experience with you as a bishop coming from Nigeria. I'm coming with very, very, very positive experience of the church and young people. We have our problems. We have our problems because public institutions have failed. And the church seems to be about the only institution towards which young people can look upon with hope. And we are trying as much as we can not to fail the young people entirely. And I notice from my own experience that each time I call for a meeting or an encounter with young people, I will have to put a cap on the number of representatives that will come from a parish. Otherwise, we can't have any space. I mean, we can't have any field that will contain the number of people, the young people that will just want to be around. That just shows you. And when they come, they want to listen, they want to ask questions, they want to touch, they want to take selfie, they want so many things. And it's very encouraging. And they still see in bishops and priests the father of the family, the larger family that is the church. That is a very positive thing for us. And in spite of all the pain we feel about the stories that are not so encouraging, about the very negative stories we hear, in spite of all that pain, there is still reason for hope. And there is so much reason for hope that we think that is an antidote, so to speak, to the negative stories. And the story in Nigeria is not a unique story, because I believe it's also the experience in many other parts of the world. Even in those parts of the world where the stories of failure are so loudly told, I believe there are also so many positive stories coming from those parts of the world. So I think that's about the only thing I will say now, and tell our young people. In Nigeria, really, young people, they just want to be part of it all. They don't want to replace the older people in their responsibility, because they know it is not a joke to be in the position of older people. But they want really to be part of it all. And I invite you also, as young people, not to just remain silent and talk about the church as it was somebody out there, but to realize that we all are church. Thank you very much. I don't know whether I've said anything helpful, but maybe from the dialogue we will then be able to say more. So, where do we stay?
Woohoo! Thank you, Bishop Bona. At this time, I'd like to introduce our first student panelist, Marisa Gabriel from Bermuda. This afternoon, I had the privilege of hearing all the panelists for the first time, and I was very moved, and I hope that you will be too. I think these are some wonderful voices, and we're very privileged, again, to have these voices from around the globe, contributing to the conversation. So with that, Marisa.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Marisa Gabriel, and as Pia mentioned, I'm from the very small island of Bermuda. I'm currently a student at the University of Notre Dame, pursuing a doctorate in law. And I'm so thrilled to be here with all of you, and humbled to be here at the beginning of the Synod on youth, faith, and vocational discernment. And I'm so happy to be able to share some of my experiences as a young Catholic with you. I was raised as a Catholic by my mother, and she gave me a very beautiful example of faith and piety as a child. As is the case with many young people today, during my high school years, I was pulled into a world that was very far from God. Growing up in a single-parent family had a profound impact on my development and my growth as a person. In high school and university, I experienced so many forces vying to give me a sense of an identity. Materialism, professional prestige, the over-sexualized media, and the false promise of independence. All of these things took advantage of the weaknesses and the insecurities that I had, and I still have as a young person today. The advent of social media magnified all of these forces, and as a young person, I felt pressured to put forward a false identity and to present a veneer that masked the woman that God created me to be. As a young person, I tried to fight the pain that I felt by finding my own way and creating an unauthentic identity. During my university years, after a particularly bad breakup with my boyfriend at the time, I had a profound experience, and I suddenly understood that God wanted more for me, and He wanted to give me a life that was better than what I could have planned or hoped for on my own. And this was a significant turning point for me. The only intelligible explanation that I could find for the suffering that I experienced was in the Catholic Church, and it was still a mystery. But somehow, looking at the wounded body of Christ, which is the Church, and the sorrow of Our Lady at the foot of the cross, I found hope. I understood that Jesus was moved by my suffering and that He loved me with a human heart. I started to realize that I could actually be in an intimate relationship with God and that He wanted to share His whole life with me. Much of my own healing process came through confession, receiving the Eucharist, and prayer in front of the Blessed Sacrament. These are all unique gifts of the Catholic Church, which helped me to discover my unique identity as a daughter of God, and also helped me to discern my vocation and my professional path. I think that this synod is a wonderful opportunity for the Church to ponder how to make the sacraments more available to young people today. The youth of today need generous priests who can offer daily Mass and many opportunities for confession. We need churches to be unlocked and open, available to young people, so that through prayer and the sacraments, we can encounter the healing power of Christ, which for many of us is the first step to discovering what our unique mission is in life. I came back to the church as a young person because it was the only place that I found true joy, peace, and freedom. And all of those stemmed from me discovering my unique identity as a daughter of God. I'm very thankful for all the gifts that I've been given and especially my faith. So thank you for taking the time to listen to me this evening.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Wen from Beijing, China, and currently I study at the University of Notre Dame in the doctoral program of theology. I was born to a family in China which was not Catholic, but when I was about 5, I once visited a Catholic church and was struck by the beauty of it. In the courtyard of the church stood a blackboard with a Bible verse from the book of Revelation. Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last. I am the living one. I was dead, and now look, I am alive forever and ever. Of course, I did not fully understand the significance of these words, but I couldn't stop thinking about them, and I kept visiting the church again and again. When I was 14 years old, I eventually became a Catholic. Since then, the church has been a home for me, but not in a typical way. I guess one character of a home is the intimacy shared by family members. However, as an extremely shy person, during my first 4 years in the church, I didn't talk to any other Catholic. Nor did I go to any event in my parish. Yes. And every Sunday what I do, I just went to Mass quietly and then watched other people talking and laughing after Mass. But I spent most of my time reading spiritual writings in the parish bookstore. And that is not what you typically do in your home. However, I'll still call the church a home because I know that the intimacy between the people comes not from after Mass talk, but from the communion in Christ to which I belong. And I also know that the beautiful spiritual writings of the church is part of the living tradition of the church to which, again, I belong. And therefore, I saw the church as a home from the very beginning, and I'm grateful for all the grace that I have received through her. For me, taking up the faith means living a new life. One of the most overwhelming facts that I've learned from the church is that nothing falls out of God's providence. Inspired by the simplicity of the lives of the saints, I decided to be more careful, not only with my deeds, but also with my thoughts. For example, before, I would congratulate a classmate on doing well in his exam, but at the same time in my heart being super annoyed and saying, why not me? But being a Catholic, I can't play this game anymore. And actually, this is a tough battle, as you can imagine, and probably a lifelong one. But in fighting, I find a freedom that I had never had before. That is, for the first time, I had nothing to hide in my heart. Both the good intentions which God has granted me, and even the wrong ones, which I would simply admit to be wrong, but try again to fix it. God has become my light, and therefore I'm no more afraid of light. My life in the church has also changed my relationship with people. I learned that all people are created by God in His image, and therefore deserve my love. I have to admit that sometimes I find it difficult to love some people, to find Christ in them. However, God puts His own love in me, and that love drives me to approach those people, and actually I end up being friends with many of them. So it is really a transcendent experience to be driven by love that goes beyond your understanding. And this also reminds me of the mystery that the divine artist can paint his own image with any brush, and even with a tiny, tiny painting brush like me, and it was really beautiful. You might have noticed that, with this painting brush thing, I'm quoting from Saint Therese, who is my favorite saint. While reading her autobiography, I'm always impressed by her practice of little acts of virtue. For example, she folds the mantles left by her sisters, and when it comes to daily necessities, she would choose the most inconvenient and ugly ones for herself. And even once when a sister kept making noise in the church, she struggles to bear it with patience and even tries to enjoy the sound as if it were music. Unsurprisingly, the kinds of problems Saint Therese had to deal with turn out to be timeless. Therefore, when I feel annoyed or offended, I always try to ask myself, like, what would Saint Therese do with it? And then I will remember her heroic battle of charity and self-sacrifice, which encouraged me to do the same. Another thing I learned from Saint Therese, which I think is very relevant for the church today, is the importance of praying for priests. I am blessed to have encountered some very holy priests in my life who correct my faults, guide me through spiritual desolation, and always keep me in their prayers. Since it is hard to overstate how much a priest can do for our soul, I believe all faithful should try their best to support the priests. Saint Therese described a beautiful vision of the church, in which the priests preach by works and deeds, and people like herself assist the priests with prayers and sacrifices. At this time and at these meetings, I think it is especially important for the faithful, especially young persons, to pray for the shepherds of our church. And likewise, I encourage our shepherds, our priests and bishops, to walk with us in our faithful journey, to affirm our desire to be holy by the witness of your lives, and to encourage our holiness through your example. With the help of God's grace, let us grow in holiness together. Thank you.
Buonasera. Good evening, everyone. My name is Eduardo Santini. I'm a practicing attorney and postdoctoral fellow in Florence. At a time in my life, while I was completing my law degree, I felt lost and I didn't know where to go. Though I was raised Catholic and I had received the sacraments, I was far from the church, and I really didn't think that Jesus could help me re-emerge from that situation. Then, though I couldn't realize it at the beginning, the Lord called me, using the person I trusted the most, Margherita, my girlfriend at that time and now my wife. As I came to know her, I began looking at her family and witnessing the experience of faith that they shared with others. I was so attracted by the true happiness that these people shared with each other. I could see that their communion wasn't about running from the real world. On the contrary, it was about looking at all the circumstances in life in a true and enlivening way. That way captured my heart. I wanted so badly to live with that openness. At the same time, however, I had a tremendous fear of making mistakes, of being inadequate, of failing. Now, I know that God, who has known me since before I was born, saw this. He saw that, though I was surrounded by witnesses of beautiful, true, and just life, and in spite of my fervent desire to live that kind of life, I was determined by fear. I saw my human limit as a condemnation. So, it happened that I started reading some books on the lives of the saints, and I was struck by their stories. St. Francis of Assisi and St. Augustine in particular. It literally broke my life patterns to realize that they too, even them, that they had convinced themselves into believing that they were free and masters of their destiny, until they finally realized that the Lord was waiting for them patiently at every moment. And He was waiting for them despite their stubbornness, their pride, their false wisdom, especially Augustine, in spite of everything. God loved every part of them, and He really wanted them, their human limit, and their sin, so that they could give witness to a holy life, a full and happy life. So, I started to perceive in the Christians I had met the awareness that every one of us is loved despite what he or she is, and despite how he or she sees himself or herself. That is the experience of the love that forgives you, comforts you, revives you, gets you back up. Always, in every moment. And I realized that the happiness I saw in those people was generated by the experience of this gratuitous, measureless love. Meanwhile, life had gone on, and new challenges came up. And the more important the challenges became, the more the sense of inadequacy grew again. But now, I knew that with the company of Christ, I could face these new challenges, not being afraid of my human limit. For this very reason, Margarita and I decided to get married without waiting to first have settled everything in our lives, but wishing to help us to face together the challenges that come. We received major help in taking this decision from all the friends we were surrounded by, and especially from our priest, Severino, who has always encouraged us to pursue holiness in the greatest things in life, as well as in the smallest one, without even ever being scared by evil. That is because evil has no power over the love that binds us together. And for the same reason, since I was at the end of my graduate studies, I said to myself, okay, I have to write my thesis. I have studied for 2 years, but I don't know where to start. Panic. Yet, if Christ really wants to stay with me and walk by my side, if he's ready to help me carry my cross, my small cross, then I must do nothing but respond to that always present love and say yes in daily life. So it was for my own convenience that I say yes to that call. And as I went on writing my thesis, I felt that I was becoming more patient and passionate about my work. However, people who saw me working were surprised at my patience and passion. So they started to ask me what was the reason behind the serenity, the happiness. And I realized that the call of the Lord was about giving glory to him, to his love. Just a few months ago, I received my PhD, but then something unexpected happened. This tension of trust in the face of human weakness was released in a flash. At the beginning, it was a relief to me. Yet, very shortly, I realized that without the tension, which had constantly reminded me to say yes, my life was no more as full and as free as it used to be. Therefore, I began to look even more at the church and its living witnesses, like our Pope, with a desire to learn to live with this good tension, even in the most ordinary and daily circumstances. In the end, I am grateful for the opportunity to share with all of you at the beginning of this synod my belief that every day, every moment, in all circumstances, the measureless love is the law that holds the world together and makes my heart happy. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Allie Cox. I'm from Indiana, and I am currently studying at the University of Notre Dame Law School. I'm so grateful to share with you today how I have experienced Catholic social teaching to be one of the most beautiful parts of my faith life. I love being a member of the Catholic Church, but I struggle with doubts daily. I struggle when my family or friends suffer. I struggle intellectually with some of the more abstract dogmas of our faith. And in light of recent revelations of abuse in the church in the United States, I have had days where I really struggled with the credibility of the church. But on every day of doubt in my young adult life, Catholic social teaching is what has brought me back to Christ. In Catholic social teaching, or what St. Pope John Paul II deemed Catholic social doctrine, I have experienced the most intimate, compelling, and beautiful path to truly authentic human freedom and pursuing the common good. There are 7 principles of Catholic social teaching. 1, the life and dignity of the human person. 2, the call to family, community, and participation. 3, the gift of rights and the obligation of responsibilities. 4, the preference we give to the poor. 5, the dignity of work, no matter how simple. 6, the call to solidarity and communion. And 7, care for all of God's creation. To me, Catholic social teaching in theory and in practice is unique and compelling because of how it understands the infinite and irreplaceable value of the human person. That the person is both body and soul. That a person's value is not defined by what it produces, but by the very fact that it is made in the image and likeness of God. That persons are fundamentally relational, and that we flourish together in communities. That we are at once infinitely valuable as individuals, and we also become our best selves when we are in communion with others. What a great gift this can be to the life of the church, and especially to young people who are away from the church. Sadly, one of my frustrations as a young person is when these beautiful and coherent principles are subjected to the false dichotomies of modern secular political life, especially in the church in the United States. Often, certain Catholic social teaching principles and the language around them are co-opted for political gain, but the entirety of the theory of Catholic social teaching is ignored for its political inconvenience. The current state of the church in the United States suggests exactly that. Picking and choosing principles from the social doctrine of the church compromises the entire pursuit, and an inability to practice what we preach compromises the authenticity of our witness to truth, goodness, and beauty. Though I'm only a young person, it is difficult for me to imagine that there has ever been a time in the church in the United States where it was more obvious that power sought through reducible political gain rots the church from the inside out and robs people of faith from the communal effort of holiness, that holiness that young people especially need and desire. Certainly, the holiness of the church and the grace of the sacraments do not depend on the holiness of its members or its leaders. But the role of the church on earth is to reflect and participate in the self-giving love of God. It is so difficult to see parts of the church abuse the vulnerable through a kind of manipulative power that subverts and rips the fabric of Catholic social teaching apart. I do not experience Catholic social teaching to be easy. I do not experience Catholic social teaching to be convenient. In fact, I experience it to go against the materialistic and relativist tendencies of much of contemporary culture. It is difficult, but it is wholeness and enduring truth that can be a light for the world, especially young people, as it has been for me. I am committed to the church because I believe that the Catholic Church is an instrument for healing. But right now, the church needs healing. Catholic social teaching can heal the church of politics and division, especially the kind of politics and division that have allowed for abuse in our past. Catholic social teaching invites young people into a rich life of faith, helping us to understand why we are here, who we are called to be, and how we are called to relate to each other. These are the biggest questions that young people face every day. I hope at the beginning of this time the church is taking to think about young people and our faith, that we can all renew ourselves to an uncompromised life of faith that is authentically lived, and that the enduring lights of the church, such as its social doctrine, might be lived and communicated to the fullest. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Rafael Walsh. I am from Galway, Ireland, and I am a law graduate and more recently a theology graduate. So as you probably could have predicted, I'm now working in TV production. So I'm so pleased to be with you today. I was fortunate to grow up in a household where both parents and the religious that accompanied us provided me with an upbringing that conferred a deep understanding of faith, culture, and the family. This education which fostered my individuality, has inspired me to always strive for sanctity, despite the many failings I experience daily. Looking to St. Augustine and realizing that our hearts are restless until they rest in God, I am convinced that it is only in Christ that we become who we are. And so it has been for me and continues to be. Growing up in the rural west of Ireland, the ruins of a 12th century Cistercian abbey, amidst a wild and rugged landscape, was only a short walk away from my family home. Playing inside those walls, pondering the society that existed there up until its dissolution, left deep impressions on me. Marveling at the beauty that surrounded me, I ignited an ardent desire to know the creator of it. Those walks, and even the time playing there, transformed into a meditation of those higher things. The encounter with beauty, even those seemingly ordinary days of play in my childhood, led me then, and still leads me, to God. This was consistently emphasized in my family home. From discussing family history at the dinner table to praying the rosary on family car trips, the life of our family's domestic church always pointed to God through our experiences together. As I imagine is the case for all people, young and old, I've had great experiences of difficulty and joy in my life, which in their own ways have paved the path I feel I am walking. When I was 13 years old, I fell ill with transverse myelitis and couldn't walk. I was thrust into the depths of my faith that enveloped me growing up. Suddenly, I understood that suffering and sacrifice is made beautiful only in and through Christ. Even by my little suffering, I realized that as Christ surrendered himself to the Father's will in a total gift, we are called to imitate him in this call to giftedness. I don't consider it a coincidence at all that during my illness, I was brought to the feast of Our Lady. She perfected self-giftedness by way of her fiat, and this is a response I try to reissue daily. A book that has had profound influence on me is Chesterton's classic, What's Wrong with the World? A title admittedly a little curious to bring up when talking about the church's positive influence on young people in our times, but as I'm sure many of you here know, the answer to the question posed in the book's title is that we do not seek good, which is ultimately the search for truth that enables authentic human freedom. This crisis for Chesterton was wrapped in a relativism that, though it promises a kind of freedom, falls well short of our call to be saints. It is a confused notion of freedom that is at the rotten core of the problems of our times. True freedom, as Pope John Paul II explained, consists not in doing what we like, but having the right to do what we ought. Knowing what we ought to do and knowing what we have to do to follow it through is true freedom because it transforms us into who we are called to be. As I think about the present day and the challenges and opportunities for the church's engagement with young people, I think of Chesterton's quote, "Men have not tired of Christianity. They have never found enough Christianity to get tired of." To know who we are and to know what we ought to do, we must turn to the person of Christ and live out our fiats, our call to giftedness. It is only in Christ that we find true freedom, love, peace, and fulfillment. It is in the Sacred Heart that we find our rest. Indeed, man cannot fully find himself unless he makes a sincere gift of himself. At the beginning of this synod, I pray and hope for a return to the freedom and flourishing promised in a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Our road to salvation, true freedom, is through the pillars of devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, the new Eve, and the Eucharist. We as young people long to be our authentic selves. I firmly believe that we will never know ourselves as we truly are, wonderfully and fearfully made by it in the image and likeness of a loving God, without this relationship, without this friendship. The acceptance of this truth, postulated by way of the Church's tradition throughout the centuries, is the true value of my meditative steps in that 12th century abbey, and I pray will remain with me all the steps I take in life. Thank you.
Your Grace, Bishop Ona, Your Grace, Bishop Baron, Dr. De Soleni, and to each and all of you around, good evening. My name is Caroline Cecilia Accola, and I am a student of Church Communications at the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross here in Rome. I am originally from Kampala. A little about myself. I am privileged to have grown up in a Catholic family, both mother and father Catholic, still alive, and I've worked with the church for a while, which has been a good thing for me. I've also interacted with the bishops, so somehow I have an insight of how some things work, but not all of it. For instance, this is really strange, but I really had to search the net to figure out how to address the bishop because I couldn't. My experience includes the fact that we are privileged with a parish that has a section that incorporates young people very well. And for some reason, we have been part of the church for a while. But there are still some missing links, as always. I would like I must say I'm not here to stand before you to represent anyone because I do not know each one's state of life. I stand here, however, hoping that I can identify with some of the greater need of any young African or any young person around the world. Since Christianity is here, in my opinion, I think it is, and its existing is part of our identity and our reality. We simply ought to behave as such. Christians need to act as Christians. As in, that goes for all of us who assume adoption and adopt this as a way of life. When we feed and nourish our souls and that of our neighbor, simply with the two greatest commandments, all that has been said this is just a base. Two greatest commandments, that of the love of God above all and our neighbor above everything else, just as we love ourselves, and no complexity to understanding this concept. Then we cannot go wrong. This is what young people need today. If focus is placed rather on vain tendencies, like pleasing creatures, obtaining materialistic power and money, which are but not even essential, then poverty of the spirit stands to dominate. There is a need for more strengthening of the human soul. It does not matter where this soul is. Maybe Africa, maybe Europe, maybe Asia, maybe America, but what is important is to strengthen that human soul to even withstand tough times, trying times, so as to be even worthy for the kingdom of God. Otherwise, we only gain Christians of routine and caprice, as St. John Vianney puts it. You know, like, you just go to church because they say so. You genuflect because they say so. Anyway, I think many young people, especially today, need that which is truly the image of Christ among us, which seems to be declining. And my request is that I pray that there is a return to the drawing board for a reflection, a recollection, and a renewal to this. I would like to above all thank the Blessed Trinity for allowing me to be part of this. Our Lady, my guardian angel, the saints who have accompanied me always. Thank you, and have a grace-filled evening.
evening, everyone. My name is Gonzalo Martinez. I'm currently a graduate student in computer science at the University of Notre Dame. 2 years ago, I could not have imagined I would be standing here in front of all of you in Rome talking about my faith and the Catholic Church. That is because 2 years ago, I was away from the faith, from the church. I was still in my home country of Uruguay, where I and other young people experienced a kind of hopelessness because of widespread corruption that led and still lead many to be deaf to the good news of the faith. When I was in middle school, I had to transition from going to a Catholic school to a public school. I was not prepared to resist the challenges of a social and cultural setting that was hostile to Catholicism. Even then, I needed the church to push me towards God, to remind me of my obligations towards Him. But I felt that the good news of the church could not reach me then and there. This was during a time of political change, during which the church appeared to have retreated. My generation that started out Catholic fell from the faith. I was lost for so many years in Uruguay because I could not hear the voice of the church. I needed someone to tell me not only that God still loved me, but also that I should participate in the life of faith that leads to Him. I'm here today because God led me to the University of Notre Dame. At Notre Dame, I was moved to enter full communion with the church through the rite of Christian initiation. I am grateful for a holy group of friends at Notre Dame that received me with great joy. I never had a group of friends like them. Instead of pursuing material and physical pleasures, my friends would talk about how to be more humble and more helpful to the people around them. They did not admire the rich and famous, but instead strived to be like those saints who never compromised the integrity of the Catholic faith, even when faced with death. One friend in particular was crucial to my journey in growing closer to God. He was courageous, always prioritizing what was pleasing to God over conforming to societal standards. He was an inspiring witness for me because he was not trying to fit God into his life, but rather trying to fit his life to God. From my perspective, I believe this serves as a helpful reminder to all of us of the courage it takes to be a Catholic, to truly be a faithful church. The world needs the church to be a beacon of faith and hope, to be the voice of Christ when we cannot hear it ourselves. Teach us to pray, to serve others, to receive the sacraments, to pursue responsibility, to embrace obligations to God and neighbor, which is to seek the real beauty of life. To my experience, what we need as a young people is for the church to be a visible example of faith fully lived and never compromised. We truly want the fullness of the faith and the life of the church, not an accommodation of it to the world. Truly, we don't want our faith to be subject to the standards of anything that is not inspired by the gospel. Our attraction to the church does not lie in its ability to bend to the whims of man, but for its ability to give witness to Christ, often in spite of them. We are enthusiastic about what the church holds most dear, about what is truly good, true, and beautiful. In my experience, cultural forces will not stop trying to compel and to convince us that a life of pleasure and material wealth is the true meaning of life. if the church does not reach us while we're young, someone else will tell us what we should live for. If anyone has turned on the TV recently or browsed the internet, they will find a million voices telling us that we can find happiness far, far away from God. In fact, that our happiness is not with God. Truly help us see that it is a blessing to struggle if we are struggling for God. Help us to see that it is only in facing evil head on that we truly appreciate goodness. Might that be the brand of the church? What an uplifting gift it would be for a church that confronts evil with the good, the distorted with the beautiful, and the false with the true. We come here because this is Christ's church. So as we place our hope in Christ, we also place it in those he chose to lead his church. So lead us with Christ at the center, Mary to petition, and the witness of the saints to follow. Let us walk together in this journey and help each other achieve the holiness we truly desire. Thank you.
Just a big thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you very, very much. I know that you've taken a lot of time out of your busy schedule. I know that there are classes to be made up and exams to be crammed for when you return. So thank you. Your witness has been very important. I'd like to welcome John Allen and Bishop Barron to the dais to begin our conversation. So if you'll please join us. How we can engage young people. These two hardly need any introduction, but we'll do a brief one. John Allen is the founder and editor of Crux, specializing in coverage of the Vatican and the Catholic Church. He has written 11 books and is also a popular speaker both in the United States and internationally. Bishop Barron is the founder of the Word on Fire Catholic Ministries. He's also an auxiliary bishop in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. He's the host of Catholicism, a groundbreaking, award-winning documentary about the Catholic faith, which aired on PBS. His most recent project is Word on Fire Institute, a new hub for spiritual and intellectual formation, training members of the Word on Fire movement to proclaim Christ in the culture. Bishop Barron is also serving as a delegate from the United States. Please join me in welcoming Bishop Barron and John Allen. First.
Well, Bishop, I think my role here tonight is to try to inject a sort of journalistic note into our conversation. So I do actually have a series of questions for you. I warn you, they get tougher in ascending order.
Great.
But we will start with this. What do you think of what you just heard?
Extraordinary. What I was struck by was, in a way, how classical all the paths are. As you were laying out what led you to a deeper relationship with the church and with Christ, I'm Augustine and Ignatius and the Little Flower, and you see these classic paths. A lot of you mentioned the true and the good and the beautiful, and that's it. God is the good, the true, and the beautiful in their properly unconditioned forms. And so the particular good, true, and beautiful are triggers very often, and that's as old as Plato, but then you watch it all through our tradition. And you all talked about in different ways that it's some particular form of the good, true, or beautiful was a trigger to you that got the restless heart engaged, and you guys followed it all the way, see, to God. And we trust that everyone's on that path ultimately. And you followed the restless heart all the way. But I was just, as you were all speaking, I just kept taking notes of the great figures you kept reminding me of, and really how classical these paths are. And the church shouldn't lose confidence in that. That was the first thing that struck me.
Okay, now we're shifting into the tougher portion of the evening. Got a note from one of your brother bishops in the United States who was not here in Rome, but who was watching the kind of dynamics of the Synod from afar. And his initial reaction, watching some of the opening pageantry, was that this is designed to be an exercise in listening to young people, right?
Yeah.
but you have 270 some bishops here and 36 young people. Question, you know, I mean, you've built your brand reaching out to young people in some ways. I mean, you know how it works, right? If you were going to design a church operation that was intended to hear the voice of youth, is this what it would look like?
Well, I mean, probably not. I think they're following, again, like a standard form of the synod. I think they really are trying to loosen things up a little bit and shift it around. The very fact that, as the bishop mentioned, that young people are present in the hall, I mean, does make a difference. The fact that young people will be involved in the discussion groups, that young people are going to speak during the synod. So today I think there was one auditor, right? But most were the bishop speaking. But in time, they will be invited to speak. So I think all those are really steps in the right direction. I think also the consultation prior to it was pretty good. You know, the March event, and then all the things that were done online, all the questionnaires and so on. So I think there was a really honest effort to do it. I think they're still following a pretty standard synodal form, but they've taken some good steps, I think. Yeah. So I wouldn't be completely, cynical about that.
Okay. May I? P.A., is this your party? You tell me.
Well, I have a question for you.
Yeah,
actually.
sure.
So the Instrumentum Laboris spoke about social media and using this as a way to reach young people. I mean, you're an expert in reaching the world and of all ages. Could you speak to this? Because I wonder how you're an expert in this, and I just wonder how much of that is going to be heard within the synod halls.
Yeah, they haven't asked me yet. Now, in the small groups, I'll have a chance, I suppose, to share some of my insights and wisdom on it, whatever that is. I mean, I totally get the negativity of the internet and social media. I completely get it. I deal with it all the time. I remember my first dive into it when I did YouTube videos years ago, and I didn't know you could comment on YouTube videos. Man, did I find out, because 95% of the commentary on those are sharply negative. And at first I was sort of shocked, but then once I got over that, I actually liked it because it gave me some traction. So I mean, I get all the darkness of it, but I also get the extraordinary power of it. And eventually I'll say it. I was tempted to say it today at the synod, but
you can practice on us.
Yeah, I'll practice on you. We still put so much of our time, energy, and money, I think, into our institutions. And I love the institutions. I'm a Catholic bishop. I love institutions. Don't get me wrong, and parishes and all that. But now, when so many young people aren't coming to our institutions, we have to go find them. We have to move into their space. And let's face it, their space is largely the social media space. And so that's why I think the church, should spend a lot more time, energy, and give a lot more personnel over to that outreach, because we want the good, the true, and the beautiful to get out there where young people are. You were all graced to find it in different ways, But I think it's just a tremendous tool for that. So I get the darkness of it. I really do. I've been a victim of it in some ways. The negativity of the social media world. But I also get the enormous evangelical potential of it. That's a general answer.
So let me ask you about what I think some people would consider the elephant in the room. In this conversation, which is that you are gathering here in Rome at a moment of great crisis for the life of the church. It depends on where you start the clock running, but what's the run-up to the synod been? It has been the release of the Pennsylvania grand jury report, and it's been the McCarrick scandals, and the Vigano letter, and on and on. Okay, and so we were going through another wave when the church's failures in terms of child protection and clerical sexual abuse are very much conscious. They're in people's minds. So, do you expect this synod of bishop? I know the issue actually came up several times today. Do you expect this synod of bishops to take up that issue? And if so, what might we expect in terms of the tenor of those conversations?
Yeah, I mean, the first answer is yes. The second is I don't know. I do think it will be brought to the fore because so many people mentioned it today. Bishop Caggiano, who's one of the American delegates, gave a very good sort of pointed intervention today, and he started with that. He said, look, what you just said, it's the elephant in the room. And he made the observation that I very much agree with, that you go back 10 years, let's say, and you looked at surveys of why young people stay away from the church or feel alienated. The sex abuse scandal was not up near the top. It was often mentioned, but way down. Many other things were far higher on the list. Now that shifted around in the wake of the recent outbreak. So from an evangelical perspective and reaching out to the young perspective, you bet that's a major problem, that the church is losing a lot of its credibility. I mean, if the leaders and ministers of the church don't have sufficient credibility, we can't do our evangelical work. So, yeah, I mean, I think it can and should be brought up. Precisely in this synod. I don't think it's, in other words, changing the subject. Like, oh no, we should be talking about youth, not about sex abuse scandal. Well, like it or not, that's affecting massively our ability to reach out to young people. Now, what will happen, that's beyond my pay grade. I mean, so there's the Pope right there in the room, and the American bishops, I support them. I'm a member of the administrative committee that we asked the Pope specifically to do this, to launch, a papal investigation. And I think that's still kind of in process. Again, that's way beyond my pay grade. But I supported that, and I think we should have an investigation of, especially in the McCarrick case, what happened. So
you mentioned the request for an apostolic investigation. I mean, you know the timeline here, that the idea of an apostolic investigation was announced by Cardinal DiNardo on the 16th of August during a press conference following the release of the statement. The meeting with Cardinal DiNardo, Archbishop Gomez, Monsignor Bransfield, and Cardinal O'Malley was on September 13th, so almost a full month later. And it has been made clear afterwards, although no one has said this quite out loud, that an apostolic investigation probably is not going to go forward. They're looking for some other instrument.
Yeah.
Okay. Looking back at that, do you think it was a mistake to announce the desired outcome in advance, because that might be interpreted as trying to force the Pope's hand, and it would have been better simply to approach him and say, Holy Father, let us discern together?
I don't know, I think it was an expression of what the bishops of this country felt was the right thing to do. Now, whether you interpret that as forcing the Pope's hand, I mean, finally it's up to him to decide what he wants to do. I think we just gave voice to our convictions. And I was around the table for those administrative committee meetings. So in between the two events you mentioned, there was the meeting of our committee. And that's what we determined was our kind of common mind, our consensus, that we should really push for this papal visitation. So they went and asked for it. But no, I think we just were expressing what we felt was the right thing to do. But the Pope, does indeed have a wider and more international perspective. I get all that. And we shouldn't see the church purely from an American standpoint. I get that. He's seeing other implications and so on. So that's his call, finally, because we can't discipline ourselves in the strict canonical sense. Right. And I don't mean that in a flip way. I mean that we bishops can't impose restrictions on ourselves. That the Pope alone can kind of discipline bishops. So that's what we're doing. We're asking him to do what we think is the right thing to do. So it's now in his court, I guess.
One way or another, though, you would say the U.S. bishops remain as determined today as they were a month ago to get to the bottom of what really happened in the McCarrick case? I
think so. I mean, DiNardo made the comment as president of the conference, and then the administrative committee very clearly supported that. I can't speak for every single bishop in the country, but I think that's the consensus, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I wanted to shift gears a little bit. When the three of us were together in Orange County back in February to discuss your book together, you had made the statement more or less along the lines, the church needs to stop talking about sex. I'm paraphrasing you. But what you discussed the starting point for everybody, but for young people as well. Would you speak to that? Because I think, where does conversion begin? And we've, one of our speakers alluded to the politicization of different terms and so forth. Where do we start? And how do you start that process of conversion? Because this synod, at the end of the day, should be about conversion.
The whole church is,
we're preparing future saints, I hope.
Right, and I just go back leaders. To the what we've said in February, but I have said for a long time, now this goes back some ways, that leading with the hot button sexual issues is probably not the best way to engage young people. Not that we don't get to them, we do indeed, but I always want to see them against a much richer background. These young people all articulated a very Catholic vision of the world, out of which will come the truths of the church's sexual teaching, which is deeply related to the church's social teaching, as you were articulating. So that would be my strategy, is not to begin with the hot button sexual issues, but to get to them from the wider perspective. Now, from our conversation, things have shifted around a lot, and now indeed this credibility issue has become a major stumbling block for evangelization. So it does indeed have to be addressed. Now, to your broader question, I heard this listening to all of you tonight, Chesterton's famous line about the Catholic Church is like a great mansion with 100 doors all facing out, good. There's a lot of ways in. There's all kinds of ways into this great mansion of Catholicism. Some people get in through the saints. Some get in through the via pulchritudinis, right, the way of beauty. Some get in through Cistercian monasteries. Some get in through Augustine's confessions. As Augustine got in through the preaching of Ambrose, and so that's the beauty of it. Will some people be drawn precisely by the church's sexual teaching? I think yes, especially in our very kind of mixed up postmodern culture, when a lot of people feel adrift, especially in terms of their relationships. So fine, I'm not going to limit the Holy Spirit. I mean, the Holy Spirit can move people in all sorts of ways. And the genius of Catholicism, in part, is that we have such a rich array of entree, into this reality. So that's a quick rambling answer to your good question.
Let me follow up. What about prayer? Can you?
I'm against it. No, and I love what you really mentioned, prayer, and one of you. And it came up actually today. One of the very last interventions of the day from one of the bishops was about that. He felt there wasn't enough in the Instrumentum Laboris about prayer and the importance of prayer for young people. The Rosary, some of you mentioned the Rosary. How strange, that people in a postmodern culture, hyper-skeptical, you think, but can take a rosary in their hand, and just that act of praying the rosary, which is an embodied act, has a powerful impact. For so many young people, you guys know this, Blessed Sacrament adoration. Who would have guessed that? Again, in our very fluid, postmodern, anything goes, self-invention culture. But there's something about kneeling before the Blessed Sacrament with all its Catholic specificity and strangeness that sings to people's souls, So that's where prayer comes in. And learning the basic techniques of prayer. A story I've told for years, this is true many, many years ago, a young person came to me, kind of lost, just drifting out of a pure secularism toward religion, and just asked a few basic questions about prayer, right? So I barely knew the guy. I taught him a few things about praying the Our Father in a focused way, and the Hail Mary, and finding the center of all this stuff. So a couple months later, this guy, again, I barely knew him, comes back to me, wants to talk again. And his first line to me was, I've got to stop having promiscuous sex. And I said, yeah, I'm with you. But I didn't know any of his story, but just that discipline of prayer started doing something to him. It started rearranging him from the inside, So that's a way in. That's just even the technique of prayer can be a way in.
Well, so I'm going to spare you my third tough question, because based on the lofty stuff you've been talking about, this feels too small.
No, that's...
I was going to ask you if you think the Synod is rigged, but I know what you're going to say anyway. Which
yes,
is,
I do. Yeah, no, I don't think
Which is we'll talk later. Talk to me at the end.
Well,
but... No, go. You want to answer? By all means.
No, I mean, in the measure probably that any meeting such as this, to some degree, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, because it's got to be pre-planned, and not just in that purely structural sense, but I don't know any meeting in a way that's not been rigged in advance. Now, how thoroughly? I don't think so. I think in these small groups, we'll have a chance to talk things through. We'll choose the relators tomorrow in the small groups who will, put in propositional form what they say, bring those to the relator general, who will then put the document together. So I'm hopeful that we can, have an impact anyway. It's the Pope's call finally, but...
All right. Well, anyway, the substitute question is this. Since you're going to be here all month, you were going to have the opportunity to take part on the 14th in the canonization of a number of two saints, including two of the towering figures of 20th century Catholicism. Blessed Pope Paul VI and Blessed Archbishop Oscar Romero of El Salvador. Can you just give us what's in your heart and mind thinking about the significance of these figures and what it will mean to you to be there when they're canonized?
Yeah, it does mean a lot to me, and it didn't quite dawn on me until a few months ago. That'll be right in the middle of the synod, and I'll be there as a bishop, and not just so I'll have a good seat, but there's something about, when I think of Paul VI, I think of Vatican II, and I think of just that image of the bishops from all around the world, processing into St. Peter's. And I don't mean that in some triumphalistic way. To me, that image calls to mind the universality of the church, this wonderful kind of experiment in conciliar, praxis that he represents. And the turn to modernity is often, seen as the Pope of modern times very distinctively. A Pope very much... impacted by the church's social teaching, a deep intellectual. You know, when he moved from Milano to Rome, it's something like 250 boxes of books they moved.
Yeah.
So I mean, to me, Paul VI calls all of that to mind, and then this synod is a kind of mini council. So coming up out of the council, when we all marched in for the mass the other day with the Pope, we're in St. Peter's and we're all in our mitres, and it called that to mind to me. If this is like a conciliar sort of moment, that's what Paul VI calls to mind for me. And of course, the great Romero, you talk about politicization, the famous sort of dichotomy of Romero, Opus Dei trained with a deep, very classical Catholic spirituality, and then Romero, this, sort of revolutionary figure in his, I would call it, spiritual politics, his political spirituality. In some ways, to me, it's the best of the Vatican II thing, that he brings those two things together in his person. And then he's a martyr. There's nothing more glorious in the eyes of the church, nothing more beautiful and compelling. Talk about the lives of the saints, people that were, even as Romero lay dying, people were soaking handkerchiefs in his blood. I mean, they knew this witness right before us. So that's what that calls to mind for me. And so yeah, it's a great privilege to be there for that double canonization.
I'd like to take the privilege of the last question.
Okay.
One of the things that millennials and younger have been raised with social media, right? And social media, I think we all have a love-hate relationship with it.
Yeah.
But one of the great things about it is that it really, in many cases, forces transparency. News gets out faster. Let's set aside the question of fake news, but news gets out faster than ever before. You're not waiting for 3 months or 3 years to hear what happened in the Vatican. So I think that our younger generations they expect transparency. That is part of their culture. And when I look at the abuse thing, I mean, it seems to me that if we want to deal with the abuse crisis and at the same time be highly relevant to the new generation of young leaders, that we need radical transparency in the church. I have a hard time understanding why in the church, I mean, this is a church of Jesus Christ, who's the light of the world, and yet we've been encouraged to hide things. Can you speak to this? I mean, is it wrong to speak of a radical transparency? To me, it seems consistent with, again, this generation, 2 generations now of social media. Would love your thoughts on that.
I'm with you. And I talked to older priests when I was at Mundelein Seminary outside Chicago for many years, and there were some older priests there. One of whom taught moral theology, and would speak to us about the importance of the category of scandal for them, for their generation. It was an extremely important category, not to give scandal and not to expose the church to scandal. And so that was so important in the sort of moral calculus that you can see why it led to some distortions, And I think that's what was animating. And I'll give them even the benefit of the doubt, animating in a morally understandable way some of those moves. But how anyone could see that today is a mystery to me. I think a transparency around these issues is, in every sense, a desideratum. I think that's what the church has to be about. Obviously, you have to be sensitive to false accusation. You got to be sensitive to people's legitimate claim to privacy and all of that. But having learned the lessons of the last 25 years, yes, it seems to me transparency is the right path. And people forgive the sin more than the cover-up, typically. Yeah. And so when the cover-up and then the redoubled cover-up, that gets us worse and worse position. So, yeah, I'm in favor of that. And I think you're right. In some ways, there's no choice. That the shifting landscape of the social media has really forced the issue in some ways.
Thank you. At this point, I'd like to have Bishop Onak come up, please. And we'll have Bishop Onak. You'll change. Are you sure? Okay. So we'll have Bishop Onak, sure, because he's been doing a lot of listening now. Give him an opportunity to give some brief thoughts, and then we'll open it up to question and answer.
I didn't think I would walk away after listening to these young people without saying how edified I was. And I was getting afraid that John was going to be unfair to them. After listening to them and all the path they worked to faith and the experience of the church, and then shifting attention immediately afterwards to something else. I thought it would be unfair to these young people. And I just want to say how thankful I am, how grateful I am, and how I wish more of my fellow bishops in the Synod Hall would hear the testimony you just gave this evening. And having said that, I will mention just two things. Two. One of you mentioned that the church is an instrument of healing, but the church herself now needs healing. Now, Henry Newham talks about the wounded healer. The fact of being wounded does not deprive the church of being a healer. Secondly, she talked about the wounded body of Christ, the church. Have you ever asked yourself why Jesus, who rose from the dead, who conquered death, did not remove the wounds on his body? That risen body bears wounds. That is the church. But those wounds, unlike what happens on the biological level, when any wound not healed eventually destroys the organism, the wounds on the body of the church, the body of Christ, the church, will never destroy the church. That is my faith. Because that body is risen. And finally, I think the problem with all the scandal, and that is what I've been struggling with as a young seminarian up till now. We as seminarians and later as priests and bishops were wrongly made to believe we were different. We are not. We are struggling with the same emotions, the same passions, and rejoicing over the little achievement we make on our road to holiness as you do. And please, if you realize that, then you will appreciate also the efforts we make. And if we as church, or as church leaders, had realized that earlier, we wouldn't have had to cause all this harm in hiding the fact that we are just like other ordinary men. And for this, I'm so grateful to the Holy Father. I've participated in other synods, and he has so shown us that he's just a bishop among other bishops. And there's so much disarming simplicity about his life that you even find it difficult to criticize him if you encounter him on that level. But if he had been on a pedestal, it becomes easier to grumble about some of his mistakes if you discover any. But if I discover any now, standing with the Pope, taking tea and talking, I find it more difficult to criticize. Thank you.
If you'll stay for question, we'll have question and answer.
It's the better man.
All right, so we'll welcome questions from the audience now for for Bishop Barron and Bishop Onat. Again, I would ask that your questions be precise, succinct, and be questions, not statements. And we should have there are two microphones. Do we have somebody running those? We do now. Thank you, Chris. Yes, in the back, please.
I just want to say thank you to everyone for their testimonies and also for our bishops here. My name is Anthony Johnson. I work here in Rome in television, working for EWTN, and I've lived here for about 2 years. I'm from San Jose, California.
Ah, good.
Yes, thank you. So my question, I see a lot of different tourists and pilgrims going about Rome, witnessing the beauty of the faith, usually through the churches, through the beauty of the church. Bishop Barron, you talk a lot about beauty and how it drives people, brings them into the church. I look at a lot of different designs of churches, new churches these days, and there seems to be a lot of confusion as to what is a church and what is a sacred space and how it should draw people in to be closer to Christ. What is your opinion on that for the bishops here? And what does a church going forward to design beauty look like?
Yeah, there's a lot in that question. And first, I agree with you. The via pulchritudinus, as Pope Francis put it, I think is a classic way, especially today when the true and the good are often difficult paths for people in our relativistic time. Don't tell me what to think. Don't tell me what to do. But I'm just going to show you, look, there's something beautiful. And a lot of you were brought in by the winsomeness of the beautiful, right? So I think that's a very legitimate, important path. Architecturally, I agree with you. Some of the greatest examples of beauty in the church have been our church buildings. When I was a student over in Paris many years ago, I fell in love with the Gothic churches and exulted in the way they bore the faith. You know, when I would give tours there, as I did, I was told, by the way, by the secular company that had hired me, now don't talk about religion. I'm not kidding. When I was giving tours of Notre Dame in Paris, don't talk about religion. Well, I just ignored it because how could you not talk about religion? Now, your next question is a famously complex one. I happen to agree with you. I think a lot of churches, when I was coming of age, they were built in the 70s and 80s, are pretty ugly. Now, that we can wonder why that's the case, but to me, it is the case. And I think that was counterproductive evangelically. But again, that's a topic for another whole seminar, you know.
No, I would have nothing to add to that because I completely agree.
Okay.
There's my kind of
Great.
partner.
I want to respect time. So if we could do 2 more quick questions because our guests have had long days already. So here, Christine, and then here.
Please.
Here, can someone pass the...
Thanks. My university professor in San Francisco said that it's a sin to build an ugly building. So yes.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
I was a late convert. In fact, my 10-year anniversary is today.
Today?
And yes, today. And it's been a long road. But I was really grateful for the Catholicism series, which I was a missionary in Rwanda my first 3 years in the church. Just converted and boom, I was dropped into Africa and on my own. And I was catechized by Rwandans.
Terrific.
And by your series. It was a great help.
Thanks.
Unfortunately, my question is, there's been a lawsuit in Los Angeles launched, not only against the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, but also against all the other dioceses around the state. What can you tell us about this, and what will the response of the church be?
Yeah, and my honest answer is I don't know. I just heard about it yesterday. I think Jeff Anderson brought something forward, and Archbishop Gomez and I just heard about it yesterday. So honestly, I just don't know the details of it. And I know they've been certainly in Los Angeles, pretty transparent about, people have been accused in the past, et cetera. The changes made since 2002 have been, pretty strongly implemented there. But this particular case, I just don't know enough about it yet to comment. What we're concerned about immediately in California, there was an attempt to extend the statute of limitations. Governor Brown just vetoed that, which he did many years ago too, a similar bill. But what the next governor will do, we don't know, and that will change the landscape a lot. But the particular case, I do know about it, just that it happened, but I can't say more.
Great, and over here, please.
I'm Sister Gabriela. I make my doctor in Vienna, and I'm here with a Vienna group. And my question is how to preach about our faith, honest, but how to show the beauty of the church, because we have the problem. Maybe it's European problem, but it's a problem. We show our faith, we show the church, but it's beautiful, and the people feel it's not honest. We show the beauty, but it's not the church. Do you have some tips or tricks?
You have some tips or tricks for you?
Well, you see, before I became bishop, I lived for 25 years here in Rome. I worked for 21 years as a teacher of philosophy here at the Urbaniana. I was in a parish once, and I was going around blessing homes. I came to a man's home who asked me to come up to his parlor. When I went up, he told me, I'm allowing you in not because you are a priest, but because you are African. I said, why? He said he had done business with so many bishops, and they were dirty business, and he did not want anything to do with church people anymore. So he was leaving, he had left the church. And I answered him immediately, oh, you see dirty things in the church and you leave. I have seen dirtier things and I'm staying. Because the church is ours, not anybody else's. It is ours, just as I said in the beginning. If we realize that we are struggling, then it will be less important to us what we make of individual failures. Because having been in Rome for 25 years and now come to an understanding that God is with the Catholic Church, otherwise it would have crumbled long ago. If it depended only on human beings, from what I have seen, and what I've seen is nothing compared to what is in there, in our church, of human beings directed by the Holy Spirit. And that is the beauty of the church. That for me is the beauty of the church. My parents visited here at a point, and they did not understand anything of the language, yet they felt so much member of this church than as the Pope himself. That is the beauty of the church. And for as long as we were at Piazza San Pietro that day waiting for the Pope to pass, nobody noticed us. We were 3 Africans there in the midst of so many white people. Immediately the Pope passed, St. John Paul II, and touched my parents, both their hands. Then all the Europeans and Americans there forgot they were white, and they were all embracing my parents. That is the beauty of this church. And that is the faith we share. And that is just what I think. And finally, I make this point. We notice the shadows because there is light. If there was no light at all in our soul, we would not notice the shadows at all. Let us not be overwhelmed by the shadows, but by that light that will eventually make the shadow disappear.
Amen.
All right. John, do you want to?
I don't think we'd end on a better note than that. That's
Exactly. I just wanted to take 2 seconds to say that we at Crux are honored to be part of this event. Our good friends at the Center for Ethics and Culture at the University of Notre Dame, the Diocese of Orange, represented here by their vivacious and dynamic chancellor. And wanted also to say that if you are interested in finding coverage of tonight's event, you will find that on the Crux site. That is cruxnow.com, cruxnow.com. And we would be delighted if you would come along with our journey as well as we continue to try to cover this magnificent church for us. May I ask all of you to join me first in one final round of applause for our stunning youth who gave us these magnificent presentations tonight. And the other stars of our show, Bishop Ona, Bishop Robert Barron. One is a new friend, one is an old friend, but I think you would agree they both have been enormously illuminating here tonight. Bishops, thank you.
And just as a reminder, the panelists will be available in the Sala Vetri, the room in the back, if any of the journalists have additional questions. So thank you again for your time this evening.
Great, thank you.
Say a prayer.
Oh, yes.
Say a prayer to conclude, please.
A prayer to conclude, please.
Shall we pray, everybody, as we bring our evening to a close? In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Gracious Lord, giver of all good things, we thank you for this time together. We thank you for these wonderful young people who witness to their faith. We thank you for the Synod of Bishops. We ask your blessing upon it. We thank you, Lord, for your church, which is the instrument of your love in the world. Bless it, Lord. Give it growth and give it deeper life. We make all these prayers through Jesus, who is light and Lord forever and ever.
Amen.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Blessings, everybody. Peace.
Thank you.
You better hurry.
I know I promised to be over by 9, and I did not know you were. My apologies.
Do you mind if
I had no
a quick picture of
Sure.
the students? Yeah, there's.
This is an honor.